ground under my boots was shaking so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and somewhere behind me, a warning siren was screaming that the gravity field had spiked without permission. I had 11 kilometers left to run, my legs were burning, and the voice in my earpiece belonged to an alien officer who was laughing. My name is Owen Bradley, and 3 weeks earlier, I had been the only human standing in a room full of soldiers who did not want me there. The room was on a training moon called Krivex 9, a place built by the Coalition to test the toughest recruits from every corner of known space. It had crushing gravity zones, freezing storms, burning deserts, and hunting grounds filled with machines built to hurt you just enough to teach you a lesson. Every species that mattered in this galaxy had proven themselves there. My species had not. I was the first human ever allowed to try, and most of the officers running the moon did not think I belonged. Sub-Commander Threxel was the one who made that clear on my very first day. He was easily 2.5 meters tall, built like a wall of gray muscle, with a voice that filled the whole briefing hall without him even raising it. He looked down at me and said that my species had only known war for a few thousand years, while his people had survived on a Deathworld for 10 million years before they ever left their planet. He called me a curiosity, nothing more. A handful of soldiers around me laughed, and one of them, a heavy-built recruit named Draven Kalt, told me to save everyone the trouble and go home before I embarrassed myself. I did not answer him. I had learned a long time ago that the strongest reply is silence, followed by results. The first trial was called the Gravity Crucible, and it was designed to break you before you even reached the halfway point. The moon's gravity field was cranked up to 3 times normal, and every recruit had to cross 40 kilometers of broken terrain while carrying a full combat load. The current record was held by a soldier named Osvar Kell, who had finished in just over 6 hours. Most recruits took 9 or 10 hours if they finished at all, and plenty never finished. Nobody expected much from me. I heard the bets being placed before I even reached the starting line. Some officers guessed I would collapse within the first 5 kilometers. Others were kinder and guessed 10. What none of them knew was that where I came from, soldiers train for years in mountains that never forgive a mistake, carrying weight that never gets lighter, sleeping for hours that never feel like enough. My people did not grow up on an easy world either. We simply never had 10 million years to get used to a hard one, so we had to get strong the fast way, through pain and stubbornness and refusing to quit. I crossed that 40 kilometers in 5 hours and 51 minutes. The silence in the observation deck was the loudest sound I had heard since I arrived on that moon. There was no time to enjoy it. The next trial began less than a day later, and it was even harder. It was called the Endurance Furnace, and it lasted 48 hours straight. Recruits were dropped into a zone that swung between burning heat and freezing cold with almost no warning, given barely enough water and rest to survive, and required to face a series of simulated combat encounters to be allowed to keep moving forward. Most recruits broke down somewhere around the 30-hour mark, exhausted and disoriented. I had grown up doing multi-day training exercises on a few hours of sleep and food that tasted like cardboard, learning to keep moving even when every part of my body wanted to stop. I finished the furnace, with 6 hours still on the clock, and I had not lost a single one of the combat encounters along the way. By the time the third and final trial arrived, something had changed in the way the other officers looked at me. Threxel was no longer laughing. He stood at the observation rail with his arms folded, watching me the way you watch something you are trying to understand, rather than something you are mocking. The final trial was called the Predator Maze, and it had a reputation that made even seasoned soldiers nervous. Inside the maze, armed drones built to mimic real predators would hunt you while you tried to hunt them back, using data collected from your own combat style to predict your moves. The current record was held by a soldier from an assassin-trained species, a soldier named Krill Voss, who had cleared it in 4 hours and 9 minutes. Recruits had been injured badly enough in that maze that the medical teams stayed on standby the entire time it ran. I stepped into the maze expecting a fair fight against clever machines. What I got instead was something none of us saw coming. 18 minutes in, while I was moving low through a corridor of broken stone pillars, the lighting in the maze flickered and died. My earpiece crackled with static, and then Threxel's voice came through, sharp and urgent in a way I had never heard from him before. He told me the maze's control system had lost its connection to command, and the drones inside were no longer running on their training settings. Somewhere in the system, a fault had pushed their behavior past the safe limits that were supposed to keep recruits from real harm. The observation deck was trying to shut the whole system down, but it was not responding. I was alone in the dark with machines that were no longer playing by the rules. My first instinct was fear, sharp and immediate, but I pushed it down because I knew panic would slow me down more than the malfunction ever could. I forced myself to breathe slowly and listen. Somewhere ahead, I heard the low mechanical whir of a drone shifting its weight, and I used that sound to guess its position instead of waiting to see it. I moved to the side of the corridor and pressed my back against the stone, letting the shadows hide me, the way they had hidden hunters on Earth for longer than any written history could remember. My people did not invent patience in the last few centuries. It was carried down through generations that had to wait quietly in tall grass or thick forest for a single chance to survive. The drone rounded the corner faster than I expected, and I felt its presence more than I saw it, a shape cutting through the dark air toward where it thought I was standing. I dropped low and swept its legs out from under it with the flat side of my training staff, sending it crashing into the stone wall hard enough that its systems sparked and went still. There was no time to feel relieved. Threxel's voice came through again, tighter now, telling me that 2 more drones had shifted toward my position, and that the observation deck still could not regain control. He told me, almost like he did not want to say it, that if I could not find a way to disable the maze's core control unit myself, they would have to send in an extraction team, and that would end the trial, and possibly my chance to ever attempt it again. I did not want to be pulled out. Not after everything it had taken to get here. I asked him where the control unit was, and he gave me the direction without hesitation this time. No mockery left in his voice at all. It was near the center of the maze, guarded by the last stretch of corridors, the same corridors where the 2 remaining drones were now converging. I moved fast but quiet, keeping close to the walls, using every trick I had learned from years of training in terrain that never gave you a second chance. My legs still ached from the crucible and the furnace, but pain had stopped being something I listened to a long time ago. It was simply there, like background noise. The next drone caught sight of me sooner than the first had, and this one moved with a speed that told me the malfunction had pushed its systems well past their intended limits. I did not have time to plan a clean approach. I grabbed a length of loose cable from the corridor floor and used it to catch the drone's forward leg as it lunged, pulling hard enough to throw it off balance and send it tumbling past me into the stone wall. It did not get back up. My chest was heaving, sweat stinging my eyes, but I kept moving. 1 drone left, and the control unit somewhere just ahead. I found the chamber holding the control unit at the same moment the final drone found me. It came from above, dropping down from a ledge I had not noticed in the dark, and I barely had time to twist out of the way before it landed where I had been standing. I rolled across the floor, ignoring the sharp ache in my shoulder from hitting the stone, and came up facing it just as it turned to strike again. I did not try to outmatch its speed, because I knew I could not. Instead, I let it come to me, waiting until the very last moment before stepping to the side and driving my elbow into a joint near its base that I had noticed was already sparking from the strain of its malfunction. It staggered, and I used every bit of strength I had left to push it hard enough that it collapsed against the very control unit it had been guarding, its weight crushing the exposed wiring and cutting the power completely. The lights in the maze flickered back on, and silence fell so suddenly it felt strange after everything that had just happened. I stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, arms shaking, staring at the still shapes of the drones scattered behind me. Then Threxel's voice came through the earpiece again, quieter this time, almost careful. He told me the system was fully back under control, and that the fault had been traced to a technical failure that no one could have predicted. He told me I was clear to finish the trial if I still wanted to. I looked at the timer on my wrist display. 3 hours and 12 minutes had passed since I entered the maze, and I still had the final stretch ahead of me before reaching the exit point that marked the true end of the trial. I did not hesitate. I ran. The last section of the maze was nothing compared to what I had just survived, but my body did not know that. Every step felt heavier than the last, my legs burning with a kind of exhaustion I had never pushed through before, not even during the crucible or the furnace. I kept my eyes on the exit marker glowing faintly in the distance, and forced myself to keep moving, one step at a time, refusing to let my body decide the outcome before my mind did. I crossed the exit line at 3 hours and 44 minutes, well past the point where any of the previous danger had been resolved, but still faster than any recruit had ever completed that maze under normal conditions, let alone one that had turned into something far more dangerous than intended. The observation deck was silent when I stepped out into the open air, blinking against the sudden brightness after so long in the dark. Officers who had spent weeks mocking my species stood frozen, watching me with expressions I had not seen from them before. Threxil walked toward me slowly, and for the first time since I had arrived on Crivex 9, there was no mockery in his eyes at all, only something that looked like respect, mixed with a kind of confusion he could not quite hide. He asked me how, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it, how a species with only a few thousand years of recorded conflict could move the way I had just moved, could think the way I had just thought, under conditions that would have broken soldiers from species who had lived through 10 million years of hardship. I wiped the sweat from my eyes and looked him straight in the face before I answered. I told him that his people had 10 million years to get used to a hard world, but my people never had that kind of time. We had to get strong the fast way, through history filled with disease, famine, cold winters, and constant struggle, learning to adapt within a single lifetime instead of across countless generations. I told him that being called soft by someone who had never truly tested us meant nothing, because the moment we were tested, we found a way to rise anyway. Draven Kalt, the recruit who had told me to go home before I embarrassed myself, stood near the back of the crowd with his arms crossed, saying nothing at all. I did not need him to say anything. His silence told me everything. Word of what happened in that maze spread across Crivex 9 faster than any official report could move through the usual channels. By the next morning, recruits from other bunks who had barely spoken to me before were suddenly asking questions about how I trained, how I stayed calm when the systems failed, how I found the will to keep moving when every instinct told me to stop. I answered every question honestly, because I had never wanted special treatment or unearned respect. I wanted to prove that my species deserved a place among the soldiers training on that moon, not because someone handed it to us, but because we had fought for it, the same way every other species there had fought for their place. A week later, official word came down from Coalition Command that the malfunction inside the Predator maze had been fully investigated and confirmed as a rare technical failure, not a deliberate test. They also confirmed something else, something that spread through every barracks on Crivex 9 within hours. My times across all 3 trials, the Gravity Crucible, the Endurance Furnace, and the Predator Maze, were now the fastest ever recorded on that training moon, and the maze results stood even after accounting for the unexpected danger that had unfolded inside it. Threxil was the one who delivered the news to me personally, standing outside the barracks where I had spent so many nights being mocked, before earning any kind of respect. He told me that Coalition Command wanted to study human training methods more closely, curious about how a species with such a short history of organized conflict could produce soldiers capable of adapting so quickly under pressure that had broken far more experienced fighters in the past. I told him I would be glad to share what I knew, as long as it meant more humans would get the same chance I had been given, the chance to prove ourselves instead of being judged before we even had the opportunity to try. He nodded, and for the first time since I had arrived on that moon, he offered me something I had not expected at all. He extended his hand toward me, a human gesture I doubted he had used often, and told me that whatever he had believed about my species when I first arrived, he no longer believed it now. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of everything that had led to that single moment. Every early morning of mocking laughter, every doubt whispered behind my back, every trial that had pushed me further than I thought I could go. News of what happened on Crivex 9 eventually reached Earth, carried through official coalition channels, and then through every network that covered it. People back home who had spent years wondering if humanity truly belonged among the stars finally had an answer they could hold on to, not because of promises or diplomacy, but because one soldier had walked into a place built to prove weakness, and walked out, having redefined what strength could look like. I still remember standing at the edge of that training moon months later, watching a new group of human recruits arrive for the very first time, nervous but determined, carrying the same quiet resolve I had carried when I first stepped off that transport ship. None of them were laughed at the way I had been. None of them had to prove that humanity belonged there, because I had already proven it for them. Sub-Commander Threxil stood beside me as the new recruits filed past, and he said something quietly that I have carried with me ever since. He said that every species on that moon had once believed they understood the limits of what a soldier could be, until humanity arrived and showed them that limits were nothing more than assumptions waiting to be broken. I looked out at those new recruits, watching them walk toward trials that would test them the same way I had been tested, and I felt something settle deep inside me, a quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead for humanity among the stars, we would meet them the same way we always had, not because the universe made it easy for us, but because we had never needed it to be easy at all.